everyone. Let me get everything technically set up here, and then we can get started. I hope everyone can see the screen. If you can just let me know in the chat box if you can see the screen. You should be able to see a slide that says Parent Chat starting soon. If you can just put something that says, yes, I can see it, that would be great. Awesome. Okay. Thank you, Sue, for that. All right, so welcome to the Parent Chat. This is the first of 2022, and the Balance in Mind team is really excited that you're here. We have a lot of people registered, and we are excited to have a conversation with you. This isn't just a presentation. It's about really bringing the community together and being able to talk about some of the things that are going on. Tonight, we are focusing on trauma-informed parenting. For those of you who already know what this is, you're going to have some more insight into it and have an opportunity to figure out what that means for you as a parent. For those of you that this is new terminology, you're going to learn all about it from some really great experts who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. My name is Sherry Gazit. For those of you who are new to Parent Chat, I often facilitate these conversations, and sometimes I present as well. I'm the founder of TeenWise and MomWise, and so I'm in the community working with teens and parents. So I see firsthand what's going on, especially when it comes to the trauma that has been going on during the pandemic. So one of the things, the reason I'm here as a part of Parent Chat is because I'm a Balance in Mind member. I'm trying to bring mental health to the forefront and make it more accessible for parents to get information so they know how to better support their kids. So I do want to make sure we interact. If you have questions, there is a little Q&A box. And for most people, it's kind of at the bottom of your screen somewhere you can find that. And when you click on that, then it'll allow you to ask a question. What that does is it keeps all the questions tidy for us so we can make sure that we answer all of those when we have time, when it fits into the Parent Chat. Meanwhile, in the chat box, which is on the right side, you can make comments. If there's something that stands out to you, you can put it in there, and we will be asking you questions too, and you can put the answers to those questions in the chat box, and we will go back and refer to those and read those out loud. So let's start by introducing our presenters today. We have Christy Nicholson. I'm always afraid I'm saying your name wrong, Christy. But we have Christy here with us from Youth Eastside Services. Many of you probably are familiar excuse me, with them because they are in the Lake Washington School District schools. And she is really lending a lot of support to the students and are very active in the community to help out. Then we also have a new presenter tonight, Cora Goss-Grubbs. Am I saying that correctly? I hope that's right. She's also a behavioral health support specialist in the middle and high schools in Lake Washington School District. She's been there since 2019, so right when everything started hitting, Cora got to, hit the ground running for Lake Washington School Districts. And so she's here tonight to help lend her perspective and to tell us about some of the things that she's hearing and seeing and experiencing throughout everything that's going on. Before we have our presenters jump on board, we are going to start by just getting grounded for a moment. This is going to take about 45 seconds, not a lot of time. But what I find is when we are able to breathe deeply, it gets us grounded so that we are able to slow our heart rates down, to get our mind clear, to think more logically, to be ready to take on more information. So if you will, just join me for 45 seconds of breathing. This blue blob on the screen is going to kind of go in and out. You can time your breathing with that if possible. If not, just close your eyes and breathe for about 45 seconds. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for the breathing exercise. I'm going to now welcome Christy and Cora on screen, and they're going to be sharing some slides with us and to dive into what we're talking about tonight. I may be asking some questions. Again, if any of you put your questions in the Q&A box, I'll be relaying those to our presenters.
All right, great. Thank you, Sherry. And thank you for that grounding, because I need that. What happens every time when I come to these topics, I think I can give a concise overview of this and get people thinking about it, and they can kind of pursue their interests. And then the more I work on it, the more I realize there is to be said. And it becomes a little bit of a conflict for me between me just talking at you and really kind of having a conversation. And I really want Cora to have time tonight to share with you what she's experiencing with middle and high school students in Lake Washington as we have moved through this pandemic time in particular and are still kind of in the midst of it. And I think from that, you will gain a lot of insights and thoughts about how you as a parent can be most helpful. I'm going to share my screen and run through a few slides before we have Cora share. So I'm going to start that now. And all right, unless somebody tells me they cannot see, I'm going to just go right ahead. So what we have, when Cora and I and Bonnie started talking about this topic, and we realized that trauma is such a dense topic, but what we really came away with as the really most important takeaway for you all tonight is that trauma-informed parenting is good parenting, whether or not your child has experienced trauma or you're aware that they have experienced trauma. And the reason for that is that all of those components that we have been talking about engaging with your student, coming alongside them, mirroring calmness, working on keeping kind of the lid down or getting the lid back down. Many of you are going to be thinking, yes, we've heard about this. Keeping the joy, being calm, building skills for resilience. All of those things are critical for helping our students to achieve overall wellness and balance, which is the goal that we all want. And all of the principles of trauma-informed work, whether it's in parenting, it's in the classroom, it's in the workplace, are all developed to support that. So what does it mean to be trauma-informed? So these are 4 things that are coming from national and really international work that has been done on how, once we started to recognize the impact of trauma, particularly on children, but as we bring that into adulthood and into our adult lives and our communities, that there is this framework that is being talked about all around the world in many different settings. And I'm really pulling from that as our framework. And then there's some very natural, I think, extensions into parenting, but there also are some that we have worked to draw into parenting as well. But basically, being trauma informed means that you realize that trauma is real and exists, so that it's not like, oh, kids are resilient. They don't even remember anything from all those family fights or that disaster or whatever happens. They're just going to put it right out of their mind. Science says otherwise. It's prevalent. The majority of us in our communities have experienced traumatic events or experiences in one way or another. Doesn't mean we've all been impacted the same. Doesn't mean that everybody has developed post-traumatic stress syndrome. But it does mean that there's a commonality of these events, that many of us have been impacted by them. So therefore, we want to recognize that the impacts of that are going to be part and parcel of our everyday lives, in our parenting, in our homes, in our schools, in our workplaces, in our community. And then we want to think about, well, how do we respond then, given that we've realized that prevalence and that we're recognizing that there are impacts from it? How might we respond? And I put here for healing, for bringing things back into balance. I mean, it's really what, if you have a traumatic experience, and even if you just want to conceptualize this for a moment of thinking about an upsetting experience, And if you think about that, it's like, okay, your heart races a little bit, maybe your throat gets a little tight, your mouth gets a little dry, your jaw might be clenching, you might be clenched here, and you're tightening up. And meanwhile, you've got adrenaline and other kinds of chemicals kind of flowing through you that are equipping you to do that basic fight, flight, flee, fight. What am I forgetting? Anyway, our sort of basic survival responses, right? Cora, what did I forget?
Freeze.
Freeze. Thank
Freeze.
you. I
And
froze.
I've heard appease also is in there, and faint. There's all sorts of
Right,
fun words in there.
exactly. But it's that basically it's like we're either going to fight, we're going to get out of here, or we're going to freeze and hide and make ourselves really small. So we all got that biology, right? And so our prefrontal cortex, all of our kind of human smarts help us to work with that and not be limited by that. But in the case of something really distressing, we are all going there and we all have chemicals in our body and they surge through there. So healing at a very minimum is processing those chemicals and getting them out of your system, whether it's by walking them out, whether it's by breathing, whether it's by drinking a lot of water and kind of cleansing your system, talking it through, that kind of venting kinds of things. That way, those experiences don't get stuck and those chemicals don't stay toxically circulating because their purpose is already expired. We want them to be moving on out. And then we want to really resist triggering people's trauma and resist re-traumatizing in that instant. And by this, I do not mean that we all have to walk on eggshells and help people avoid their experiences. We just want to be really mindful about how did we respond? What do we say? How do we structure a situation, even a physical environment? So
Christy, there's a question that's relevant here.
Yes.
From someone. What if you're unable to avoid re-triggering, like the child lives with impending disability and progressive loss of independence, just as they should be gaining independence? What do you do if the triggers are persistent?
Well, yes. So that's kind of the reality. And I guess what I'm talking about is bringing a trigger that is, say, if you have someone, we're talking about kind of maybe physical disabilities or something that's kind of chronically eroding kind of those physical abilities. Well, so, I mean, there you recognize the reality of that and you honestly work with that person in whatever way that they're capable of responding to it to maximize their ability to be independent, to hear their real feelings, etc. What would be re-triggering in this sense is bringing in other triggers, such as being super insensitive to that and talking about like, yippee, we all get to go do this and you can't do it, or creating other barriers in the environment and adding kind of to the stress. So it's sort of those, it's in the add-ons there, not that, there is that reality that sometimes we have to accept what is, and we're working with helping somebody to do that. So what is trauma? So trauma is actually from a word that is basically has that connotation of a wound. And trauma can be invisible. People could have been traumatized and we won't necessarily know it unless perhaps some kind of trigger. This is another reason why trauma-informed parenting is good parenting, whether you know there's a trauma there or not. And trauma is basically a response to an event or an experience that threatens and overwhelms one's ability to cope. So, and where it has that sense of, it's like, usually we walk around and we know who we are, we know what we're up to, we know what we're capable of, we have anticipations about what our day is going to hold, etc., and how the world is basically organized. We have a sense of that and it's working for us. A traumatic experience overwhelms that sense. And so it can be a different experience for different people, and different people experience an event in different ways. But this is the sort of the essence of it. And so I was wondering if you guys might help out in the chat. And as I kind of continue on a little bit here, if you might put in there, when you think about a trauma event or experience, what comes to mind? So no rights or wrongs here. I just want to kind of get a full view and hear from some other people besides just me. And then get started on that. And then if you think about ACEs, so adverse experiences of childhood. So we all have tough times, right? It might be that our family doesn't have enough money. It might be that we live in a neighborhood where rough things happen. It might be that we are a member of a cultural group that is experiencing stigma and racism. And it may be that the family, has had a lot of losses and nobody can, help that. Actual physical, mental disabilities and things that we come into the world with or our family has to cope with. These are things that's like, there's no kind of blame and responsibility here. These are just kind of the things that happen to us in our lives. But there's been a lot of studies done on these adverse childhood experiences, and the more of them that you have, the more likely you are to experience them as traumatic. And if you think about that, you might have one, but maybe you have no supports anywhere in your life and you have not been very well equipped. You may be fairly traumatized by that one. Some children, some individuals might experience multiple kinds of traumas. And so it's overwhelming for them to kind of focus and work through all of those. So they are in this state of kind of chronic arousal around those traumas. Let's check back here and see what do we have in the chat.
Do you want me to read those for you?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Okay, so some of the examples: death of a parent, abuse, and as we know, there's many types of abuse, incarceration of a parent or a loved one, anaphylaxis and emergency care, natural disaster survivor, war veteran, foster care, abuse or neglect, divorce, all great examples.
Exactly. And you see the range there, right? You see the kind of things that any of us can experience. You see the kind of things that we hope it's rare that we experience. And also here we do have things that are affecting everybody in terms of kind of this sort of community-wide or even worldwide, and thinking about kind of this sort of unrelenting stress that we've all been under in terms of the pandemic with COVID. Now, certainly some of us have better resources. Certainly some of us have multiple other kinds of stressors that are going on at the same time. And some of us don't. But these things can have an effect not only on the individuals, but they can reach out into the communities. And I wanted to read something from this little book that I have that I've been using as a guide in terms of trauma-informed workplaces, but it speaks to the heart of kind of trauma in a community and impacts to me. And I thought I would share this with you. So it says, trauma is not just an individual experience. In particular, larger systemic occurrences such as war, colonization, racism, and community tragedies such as natural disasters, economic declines, pandemics, or health crises, pretty sure this book was written before this pandemic, can have a lingering traumatic impact, not just on those who experience them, but also on future generations. We may see these effects at an organizational and community level through increased isolation, polarized conflicts, increased physical or psychological violence, or disrespect for property and space. Now, I thought, I've seen some of those things in our community landscape. And even in terms of in the schools where kids came back and were doing this, I can't remember what the challenge was from. Cora will know that better, but they were damaging property.
The TikTok challenge.
Yes. It's like, wow, we've got these pent up kinds of feelings and frustrations and we can't really name them. And we're just destroying our environment. So there you heard, and you can see in all of your examples here that trauma can be immediate. So it's one, single thing in the here and now, or it can be a condition that goes on and on and on. And it can be one thing and it can be multiple things. So while it always has similarities and we always want to practice those 4 R's, it can also be very different. So here's just a little bit of a difference between the two things of the acute and the complex. So impacts of trauma. I don't want you to worry about and get hung up on memorizing all of these. And I know a lot of you who've heard me talk before, where we've talked about like where it's normal reactions to something, and is it lasting too long? Is it too intense? Is it out of context? Does it not make sense? Is it too little? Is it something that isn't there that you might be expecting? And a lot of times you're going to kind of find those extremes. What I want to point out here is that trauma does impact our brains and our cognitive functions, our physical cells and our bodies, as well as our emotions and our behavior and our interpersonal relationships, that all of these to some degree can become disrupted. And so when we're thinking again about having a restorative environment, a trauma-informed environment and relationship with our children, we're really thinking about, well, what is within our power, not to necessarily correct these things, but being aware of them to address them. And clearly they're going to take different, steps, sleep hygiene, but maybe with a lot of understanding rather than being kind of rigid about it might be really important. Looking for what are healthy foods that somebody might actually enjoy rather than getting into a struggle over it at the dinner table night after night. If there's fatigue, we might want to be consulting with a doctor, etc. With our emotional things, so what are those ways that we can give words to feelings so that we don't have to go from I'm fine to I'm suicidal? But what's all of those things in between? How do we give expression to those? What are those concepts? Do our children hear us recognizing? Do they hear us using those words? Are we validating kind of their feelings? And validating feelings isn't about saying your behavior is great and what you're doing is what I want you to be doing. It's about saying, I see what you're experiencing. I hear that. And then let's work on some other options or some solutions, or let's get you into some, let's get you some more skills. Someone asked before about kind of triggering re-traumatization. And so again, this is obviously things that you do have some control over in your environment and in helping to create an environment. And there are no assumptions that you do this perfectly or that needs to be done perfectly. What's really, really important is having that awareness and making the efforts in what you're able to do and giving your child as much as possible a sense of safety, which is something that they need to be generating for themselves as well as you protecting them. And particularly as they go from younger to older, that becomes important. How are they internalizing that? How are you helping them to learn to create safety for themselves and to create environments and relationships that have trust?
Can I say something about that, Christy, real quick?
You certainly can.
I just want to point out that it's not about creating this bubble of safety. It's about creating a safe environment for them to process and to feel supported. We can't, especially right now with the pandemic, we can't create this bubble and keep them safe from everything. So when Christy's talking about that safety, creating that safety, it doesn't mean, keeping them away from everything.
Right. Because avoidance actually is one of a trauma response in and of itself. And if we do too much of that kind of fleeing and freezing and trying to just disappear and avoid, we are not going to learn these skills to cope. And we cannot do that for our children, throughout their lifetimes. And so it really isn't fair to them if we protect them so much. And we need to just gradually, at the older they get, give them those opportunities to take responsibility, to see, test it out, can they do it, all of those kinds of things. So here, responding for healing and resisting re-traumatizing, holding an attitude of openness and curiosity. And, sometimes this is just a check ourselves place, right? Where it's like, ooh, we're real caught up in everything and stressed out. And so our easiest response might be to somebody maybe having a behavior that's unexpected, maybe uncalled for, out of context, one of those kind of beyond things, or maybe it's a failure to have done something. I won't get out of bed, or I'm going to do this. And I'm not saying every time those behaviors happen, it's trauma, but I'm talking about those behaviors here in the context of working with trauma and being trauma informed. So instead of going, what is the matter with you? Now, how many people I notice that I just have a parental tape, I hate to admit it, but that just runs about like in that tone. And sometimes I'm very successful at it's only running inside here and only I am having to hear it and my child is not hearing it. And I am doing a little bit better of a job of saying, so what happened or what's happening for you now? Or even just thinking to myself, I wonder what's happened that, it would help me to understand this behavior. Because I think if we understood, it's sort of like that all behavior is communication. If we understood what it was communicating, where it was coming from, we would not have that same kind of judgment and frustration. But I think you're going to have to work with that, because I don't know of a parent that doesn't at least have that tape in there that wants to come out and say that.
Hey, Christy, can you
Yeah.
put your slides into presenter mode so we can see the words bigger?
Oh, I thought they were in that mode. I've got them in slideshow, so what would that mean?
If you just at the bottom right, there's a little right under where it says apply to all. You see that little thing there? That should do it. The one on the right. There you go.
Aha.
There we go. Thank
Very
you. Thank
much. Okay. Reserving judgment kind of goes along with that, holding back the criticism and having that curiosity. And so this is, again, not about like judgment about whether that's a positive behavior or it's against the rules or anything like that. Those things need to be there. This is about your child's experience and their feelings and emotions, and how they are experiencing something. So that starting point is where you reserve the judgment and you validate, and then you bring forth, you're thinking to yourself, well, this is really getting you into a lot of trouble here. What can we help you to kind of learn to do differently? Or how can I structure the environment? Who else can I get to support you and help you in learning, so that you develop some skills to cope, and have a more positive experience and more positive behaviors. Building trust and safety. Again, maybe we could go to the chat here, because I'm really interested to hear from you all. When you think about building trust and safety in the context of a relationship with your child, or just in a family, between a parent and a child, what kinds of behaviors and experiences go into building trust and safety? And then this next one.
Can you say that one more time, Christy?
Sure.
So you want them to say what do they do with their kids to create that, or what does it feel like?
Yeah, what kinds of things, what kind of behaviors and experiences help to build trust and safety between a parent and a child?
Okay,
and particularly thinking about this is from the parent directed point of view. So staying calm, I see, that's one. Other things that when you do these with your children, they build trust and safety. Let's see, I'm not seeing any. Okay, check that my tone isn't critical. Compassionate responses, great. Labeling the behavior versus the child. Listening, offering physical affection and hugging. Not offering solutions right away, so that they're learning that, you view them as somebody who is capable. Because otherwise we have a very imbalanced and one-way relationship. Showing support.
Just follow through and keep promises also.
Yeah, awesome. Any others that I missed? Yep, asking, is this a good time and place to have the conversation? That curiosity and acceptance. Yeah, giving space and being available. I'm here, but I don't have to be in your face. And again, these are age dependent, right? Okay, somebody's asking about skills for coping, for the parent to teach. And I want to come to that at a different time. And I think Cora might speak to some of that too. And that also might be just a whole different, we could talk all night about that. Respecting their individual dignity. Yeah, great. So this here then is just some resources that I wanted to include. So if you want to do more reading, and particularly the, oh, I didn't put it up here. Okay, great. So my favorite book I was going to say about parenting is called Building Resilience in Children and Teens. I'll put that in the chat while Cora's talking. And it has, it's chock full of thinking through that. How do you build those skills for independence and resiliency and being trauma informed with your child? So I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to turn this over to Cora.
All right. Thank you, Christy. That was a great intro, and I'm hoping y'all can hear me okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Just let me know. Sometimes if I move around a lot, it's harder to hear. So as y'all know, my name is Cora Goss-Grubbs, and I work with middle and high school students in the Lake Washington School District. I meet with them individually, I do groups, and I also do classroom presentations. So I get to see just a wide variety of students, of ages, of cultures, of different families, and just kind of what goes on at school, talking with teachers, administrators, everybody. It's a super interesting job. And I do want to put out there that my services, the services I offer, at least for ages 13 and older, are confidential services. And so that does bring a certain set of students to me. So my perspective and what I'm going to offer is, it might be skewed towards students who are less willing to talk to their parents. Because they're coming to me because they feel like maybe they need to try to talk through some stuff maybe before they go to their parents or instead of their parents. So I just want to put that out there.
Right. But we could all learn from that, right? So it's kind of like that. You don't need to have a child who's been traumatized, to benefit from being trauma informed in your parenting. Same way, it doesn't necessarily mean that your child would be unlikely to come to you, but you could learn from those experiences of those kids. Yeah.
So, and I'm also a parent myself. I have two boys, and I guess one of them's not a teenager anymore. He just turned 20.
He's a young adult.
Yeah. And a 16-year-old. So I know parenting is so hard, and the tips I'm going to provide today are sort of the ideal, something to aspire to. We're not perfect at it, and they also need to be adapted to your family and your culture. I completely recognize that. So, but what I have seen working at the schools through the pandemic is that the past couple years, I guess, it's been like almost 2 years, has been a certain trauma for the teens, right? It deprived them of so many things that are normal and needed for teenagers to grow into their identity and their independence. That isolation, that lack of activity and exercise, the lack of connection with others, hours alone in the room, all of that was a certain kind of trauma for many teens, not all of them, but many of them. And this definitely caused more mental health issues, especially to the young people who were a little predisposed and maybe their coping strategies were just barely working for them. Well, they stopped working for this new thing that just was completely blindsided them. And they didn't try to seek help because they were isolated from the people they might talk to, their friends, school counselors, teachers. So they came back to school, and then they just kind of like melted down and have been coming to me in droves. And the other thing I've noticed is the recent spike in COVID cases has been almost like a little PTSD for some of them, as they're like, well, I know a number of the high schools now have shut down, and I
trigger.
Yeah, it's like a trigger. I was talking with some students the other day. I do a self-care club, and they were like, what what's going to happen? We don't know what to do. And are we going to have to be at home again? And maybe they little bit want to be at home because it's a slower pace and there's something nice about that, but also are they going to suddenly not have their friends around them anymore, and they're not going to have the teachers, and they all know that they learn better in the classroom. I've not met a single student who has said otherwise. So whether or not you know that your child has experienced the kind of trauma that Christy has gone through, they're experiencing symptoms. They might be experiencing symptoms that are similar to PTSD, right? That chronic and toxic stress of just never-ending uncertainty.
Yeah, that's when you haven't had the, I guess, the sort of the pieces that you need in your environment, you know, large and small, that help you to process through and kind of move things through and move on. And what you're just pointing out is that in the pandemic, it's been a lot of like, oh, this again, oh, this again, oh, this again, oh, this again. And so it's been really difficult for those kids, I imagine, just as it has for some of us adults, to really get through this to the other side. Where is the other side?
Yeah. And I was going to say, like, I'm wondering if the parents out there are recognizing any of this in themselves, those PTSD-like symptoms that we're talking about. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about what teens have specifically told me as I've been talking to them about. I kind of, I started to dig a little bit, like, why aren't they talking to their parents about this? So I dug around a little bit and asked them questions, and here's some things that they told me is that one thing is that might be, and this isn't all of them say this is different things that different students say, but sometimes some of them say their parents seem really stressed and unapproachable, and they just don't want to bug them. They don't want
to protect their parents almost.
Yeah. They want, a lot of this comes from actually protecting their parents, because they're afraid their parents are going to be disappointed in them. Someone even said, if I tell my parents, they'll be sad they didn't know that part of me. They're afraid their parents will worry about them, which it's like, I'm sitting there thinking, well, they should be worried about you, and I want them to be worried about you, because you need help. They're afraid that parents will attempt to control the situation. Like, they want to have control over sort of how to manage the mental health issues they're having. And they're afraid their parent will kind of take control of it, maybe because they tend to control other things in their life. Someone said, I assume they'll say no, so I never ask. They're afraid the parents are going to blame themselves for the problems that their children have, which is something I'm going to look at a little more, because we all know as parents that it's so hard to not blame ourselves when we see,
well, and when we haven't been able to protect our children 100%, that's a hard learning as a parent, that you're not going to be able to do that.
Yeah. And some of them say, well, they didn't listen to me the first time I told them, so I can't handle the same response again. And this might even be like, literally, it was 2 years ago they told their parents that. Their parents have probably forgotten all about that conversation, but the kid has held on to it and remembers it and is like a little bit scarred by it, and not wanting to have that feeling that they had, the disappointment when they had that first reaction from their parents. So they avoid it. And another response is, we just don't talk about mental health in our family. So that kind of goes back to Christy saying, sort of normalizing that talking about our feelings and mental health can just create an atmosphere where the child is more likely to bring something to you if they're
right. And really, to me, that is looking at kind of building towards wellness, and that wellness has an emotional aspect, it has an intellectual cognitive aspect, it has a physical aspect, it has that interrelational as well as a spiritual aspect, and it's really increasing our ability to understand all of those and how they interact, and having a vocabulary so that we can express what's going on with us without resorting to, we don't even have the words for it, so it's just coming out like literally. I mean, I think it's kind of what happens with toddlers, right? And with tantrums, they become overwhelmed by that combination of the physiology and the emotions, and they just have a meltdown. And we know we're capable as adults of doing that on occasion, but when we think about like, oh, well, how can we build in, help ourselves so that we aren't going that direction? And part of that can be having that awareness and vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly. I had some questions here I was going to just put out there for you to think about as parents, in terms of what I see among the kids I meet with. How do I add to my child's internal pressures and perfectionism? A lot of students I see, the anxiety comes out of them having really super high expectations of themselves, and they definitely don't need any more expectations higher from anyone else. They do it all for themselves.
So what was that question again, Cora, for parents? I'm gonna put it in the chat. How
do I add to my child's internal pressures and perfectionism?
If I do, how do I? Yep. Okay.
Yeah. In what ways? In what ways do I add to my child's internal pressures and perfectionism? Okay. How can I change my expectations and communication in a way that invites my child to be more vulnerable with me? It's really all about vulnerability. Like all of the things that I mentioned that students have told me, they're afraid to be vulnerable with their parents.
So is that saying kind of just how much it means to them, really, that relationship with their parents, and having their parents respect for who they are and their kind of unique capacities in that? I mean, it says to me that's a very highly valued relationship if you have that.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, fortunately or not, our children are different than we are. They have different temperaments. They have different coping strategies, privacy needs, career interests, idiosyncrasies, so much. And so like we're trying to grow them into their own person, not, mini me's, right? And so like, I encourage you to like when our child tells us like, oh, I just study better when music is on, like give them the benefit of the doubt and let them try it. Or I just prefer to sit in the dark, or I need frequent breaks when I study. They just organize their time differently. We need to respect that and let them kind of try it out. And if it turns into bad habits and problems, that can be addressed compassionately in ways that Christy has, talked about before. But so and I'm talking as teenagers. I'm talking about teenagers, the necessity for us to let them make mistakes and to gradually step backwards.
Right.
So they become their own selves.
Mm-hmm. And Cora, I would say, for teenagers, we have to let go more, right? We're stepping back more. But even in the younger ages, there's so many areas we can start to step back in and to say, we believe in you, you can do that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so hard because we want our kids to be successful and we don't want them to make mistakes, right? It hurts. It's hard to see that.
How else are we going to learn though?
Yeah, exactly. And so another question is, are my expectations realistic and compassionate? Do they work toward like the ultimate goals of a happy, healthy child. Kind of looking at the whole picture, looking at wellness in the long term, you know, and you think about yourself, right? If you're sacrificing your wellness long term, what happens to you, right? How do you crash and burn? Well, I can pretty much guarantee you that a teenager crashing and burning is more intense and sometimes tragic than adults, because they haven't learned the coping strategies that most adults have learned. So we don't want them to crash and burn because we are overburdening them, over having too high of expectations of them. It's a balance, we want to challenge them and we want to support them to meet those challenges. So a couple more things I just want to point out is that we were talking earlier about the blame. It's so hard not to blame ourselves when our child is hurting, and we don't want them to feel that way. But what I see, like a lot of the young people, the reason why they're not wanting to be vulnerable with their parents is that fear that they're going to hurt that the parents are going to blame themselves. And so maybe, just really taking a look at what are the responses you give to your child? Are there small ways that are communicating that that you feel bad about something that you did, or something that's kind of putting that barrier up of them not wanting to hurt you? I don't know, Christy, if you have any ideas there specifically, but.
Well, actually, I was just putting in the chat, made me think about this old book, but a good one still, about how to talk so kids will listen, and how to listen so kids will talk. That I think gets to that point and could be helpful on those reflections. And I think that it is communicating, maybe not kind of right like this about something, but kind of in those alongside moments about, saying, just talking out loud a little bit sometimes about, like, I wonder sometimes if, you feel like you need to protect me from, kind of me being upset and me feeling bad and guilty about experiences that you're having. And I want to let you know that, yeah, sometimes I do struggle with that, to be honest. And I can also work that through. And I really do want to hear, kind of what's going on. And your job is not to emotionally protect me. That's not your job. That's my job to do that. And something like that. So it's just sometimes like, just bringing up those points, checking it out and saying, oh, hey, I was thinking about this the other day. What do you think about this? And depending on what your style is in that, but finding that place to bring that in. And I think some of that is the self-awareness that you're talking about, of yourself as a person, and kind of, where are your vulnerabilities and where could you develop more skills? And we can all do that.
Yeah, I think one thing that's important from what I hear from teens is that we don't make our trauma of what they're going through the core issue, right? So like if they come to us, we don't have that, where we burst into tears or we're all of a sudden, anxious. We got to keep it together in that moment. We deal with our own trauma of what's going on separately from our kids. And so that's what I hear a lot. I don't want to tell my mom, because last time I told her, she started crying. She was so upset, so
right.
That's
and
just
it's also, though, not to have kind of false positivity, right, Sherry? It's like, it's also like, yeah, we are experiencing these and we are struggling with them, but it's in that moment, it's like, yeah, save that for something else. You can be that in your head, but it's like, that's what I was saying. Every parent needs a parent buddy or someone that they can go and go, and have their meltdowns and get a little perspective, and maybe even find a little humor. And so, if we don't have that, trying to find that, it's not someone to tell you what to do, but it's someone to kind of walk alongside you and sort of let you just be the human being that you are while you're working to really, sort of become better at what you're doing, whether it's parenting or something else. Right.
So Christy and Cora, we have about 5 minutes left, a little bit under that. So what are some like specifics we can give to parents, like dealing with, what's going on right now? It's like you said, Cora, 2 years. I can't believe it's been 2 years now. A little under two since things got shut down, but yeah, what do we do right now in this moment, in this trauma that we really are all experiencing collectively?
Mhm.
Well, in terms of, I mean, there's a lots of things you can do,
Yeah.
some of which you've already covered, but in terms of one thing I did want to put out there, which can be done, and is that, like, in line with this kind of parent buddy, nurturing relationships also between your child and other trusting adults, right?
Yeah.
So, like, from as young as
Broadening your
possible.
bubble, your sphere.
Yeah, broadening the bubble, because it is, like, developmentally pretty normal for teenagers to not talk to their parents about a lot of stuff. They're trying to become their own person. And so having other adults that they might be willing to confide in, would be good. And, if you don't already have that, now's a good time to do that in this time of of
Yep.
weirdness.
Right, right.
And one thought that I have is really kind of, I guess I'm a big wanting to name things person and thinking that that's helpful, because I think it makes us feel like, well, we're not here alone crazy in this. It's like, oh no, this is really going on. So kind of saying, something like, wow, it's really stressed me out that now we have this Omicron thing going on again. What are you thinking and feeling about that? With all this kind of continuing to go on, I'd like to maybe, like, let's have a focus on at least once a week doing something fun together where it doesn't have anything to do with that kind of stuff, right? It's just building that parent-child or the family relationship, really around kind of some fun thing that can be done with all of whatever the limitations might currently be. And
Yeah.
maybe also saying, let's have some check-in times, and it just be like, what's 3 words that describe what you're going on with, and then not go, okay, tell me more about that and why are you feeling that way, but just going, oh, okay, wow, yeah, just validating kind of what comes up about that. And then you can ask, and I think this has come up already, but hey, well, actually, I think it was some of the parents in the chat came up with that, but asking, like, would it be useful to talk about that? Would you like some support around that? Where do you need that from? How can I support you? And then recognizing kind of people's strengths as well in this. So both your own and your children's, like, and if the more specific they can be, the better. So rather than being like, I'm so proud of you, that's a nice message, but it's even better if you say, I noticed how you really persevered through that very difficult course. And when you had to go remote and come back, I really appreciated that tone that you took in terms of being so passionate, so considerate of your friend in this conversation that I saw. So really going for what are those kinds of really specific things that you can observe that are pieces of your child being a healthy, functioning, growing into adulthood, the best person that they can be themselves, not some other idea of what great is, but really bringing out what are their skills and talents and abilities and kind of helping them to do that, and recognizing that's a long journey. We're still doing that in young adulthood when you're kind of launching into that initial independence. So as Cora said, being mindful, helping them to figure out how to balance that mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. How do we balance that so that we have wellness, and recognizing that we just all need to do that.
Right. Right. So it's our last minute. I can't believe as always, the time flew by. Thank you for everyone for joining us. As always, if you have questions, you can email us. Bonnie or Val, can you put that email address in the chat box? And our next, let me share my slide now really quick. We have another parent chat that's coming up with Michelle Brode, who is used to be a YES, and let me see, hold on. I'll put this up, right? And so that's going to be on the 26th. If you're already registered for this series, you will get a reminder that that's going to be happening. This is going to be a really fun session. She's going to walk you through, how to bring your family to its best. And so it's going to be a playful and inspiring workshop. So it's not going to just be a presentation, but she's going to have you walk through some things. And so that should be really fun. But you're already registered for it if you're here tonight, but it would be great if you spread the word, let other people know about the Parent Chat series. We have a lot of really amazing speakers coming on. We are dealing with a variety of issues. We're going to be talking about extremism and some other things. Bonnie, if you want to come on and talk about what some of the things are, you can do that. And then, yes, and Michelle is in the audience today. So Michelle, if there's anything you want to add, you can certainly let us know about that. So let's see, as you exit the session today, there's going to be a short survey that it should send you to. It's 2 questions. It'll take about 5 seconds, but that really gives us a lot of information so that we know if we're going in the right direction for all of you. Christy and Cora, thank you so much for presenting tonight. This was really informative and gives us a lot to think about as parents, and a lot of great ideas of how we can help our kids to work through the crazy world that they are experiencing right now. So as everybody leaves, we'd appreciate if you put in the chat box something that you got out of tonight, or just words of encouragement, whatever you'd like to leave there for us. That's always very helpful. So we'll be here kind of behind the scenes typing. If you have any extra questions, we can kind of type in some answers there. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
Sherry, while people fill out the survey, can I read through who we have on the agenda for the rest of the
Go for it.
So after Michelle Broad, we have Joe Langford is going to be talking to us about cancel culture on February 9th. And we have Danit Ehrlich is going to be talking about mental wellness across cultures on February 23rd. So that's 2 Wednesdays from now. And let's see, we have Well Body, Well Mind, the connection between mental health and physical health, is particularly focusing on diet and movement and sleep and how those underpin mental health, will be on March 9th. And finally, as Sherry mentioned, we'll be looking at youth susceptibility to extremism. And we have an expert, Enrique Nusi, who will be speaking to us about that. So please, you should, if you've registered for this webinar, you should receive in the mail an email that will give you some more information about what we have coming up, and also a recap of what we did here tonight. So thanks again for being here. And have a good night.